We're going to be taking a look at a recommended prospect right now. Shout out to Drew Soccer. He reached out in one of my comment sections. He said, King Cold, Anthony Lonon Jr. is going to be a Georgia Bulldog on Saturday. It's not Saturday. It's Wednesday. We're going to take a look at him as an uncommitted prospect right now. 6'1.5", 265 from Clarke Central in Georgia. All signs point to him staying home in Athens, but we'll talk about that when it happens. So before we even get into the film here, 6'1", 265, 6'1.5", 265. Those are the numbers we have, and then taking a look at him, this kid is going to be smaller than 3/4 of the defensive tackle prospects we watch, and then maybe closer to 90% of SEC level defensive tackle prospects that we watch. So we have to be convinced of the athleticism. You know, if we're even 3 plays in and we have any issues with his athleticism, this is a kid that we turn the film off. You know, has to be twitched up. We have to be getting something pass rush wise. We totally do. This kid's one of the most twitched up defensive tackle prospects in the 2026 class. And that's all well and good. You know, I love the first step. We're going to see some high level pass rush upside with this kid, not just because of the explosiveness, but some of the other stuff. We'll see this next play here. This is my favorite play on the tape here. We're not going to see him lined up at edge rusher at the next level. You know, I actually think this kid's a bit longer than he is tall. So every human, their wingspan's pretty close to how tall they are. I think this is a kid that's wingspan is a bit wider than 6'1.5", but even at 6'3", we're going to be talking about a kid that's just not going to be too long. You know, we're going to be dealing with a bit of a shorter prospect, but you know, the first step is great. You know, we've seen this with defensive tackle prospects, though. You know, but there's a lot of kids we love their explosiveness. I really love the closing speed, and you can see the flexibility. You know, we don't talk about ankle flexion really at all with the defensive tackle prospects, just because it's so rare to see with these kids. You know, usually we're going to be watching a kid that's a bit closer to 300 already, and then maybe like his explosiveness. We're just never going to be talking about the bend. We're never going to be talking about the flexibility, about turning the corner. This kid absolutely has it. You know, that's a rare trait, I think, for a defensive tackle prospect. You know, I watch a lot of NFL draft prospects. The only one I can really remember in a similar vein was Byron Murphy coming out of Texas. And that kid coming out of DeSoto, 6 foot, man, shorter than the kid we're watching right now. But anyways, 6'1.5", 265. Yeah, the first step's great. The closing speed's really good. You know, we don't talk about second and third steps with defensive tackle prospects a lot, just because a lot of these kids don't have it. Not really like that for Anthony Lonon. You know, the closing speed's really good, the first step's really good, and then the bend's really good. So just all around a very high end pass rush potential. Now, what is the trade-off? This kid is not going to see the field on rundowns very like early in his career, and then even down the line. This kid, even if he takes the weight room serious, even if he takes the nutrition program serious, it's just going to be down the line. You know, this kid's got to get a lot wider. You know, I think he's really strong, but just at his 6'1.5" frame, just the frame that he's going to be playing with, he's going to have to be stronger than most defensive tackles to, you know, really be stout against the run. But you can even see, we'll get into some steps later where he just totally beats the offensive line. I think we'll see him against some zone. This is a bit more of a power scheme here. You can see, looks like they're running, I don't even know, this is either power or trap. I'm not an offensive line guy, but take a look at how he just wrecks this run here. You know, he's going to beat offensive linemen to their marks a lot. It's just at the next level, you know, these kids are going to be a bit quicker. It's just going to be tough when he gets into a battle of wills against kid, just because most SEC level offensive linemen will have a lot more strength and a lot more mass to them. But man, this kid is as twitched up as it gets for a defensive tackle. Look at this right here. You know, this is the second, third, and then the closing speed step that I was talking about before. Really high-level stuff, I think. You know, there's kids that made it work. You know, we remember Cansey coming out of Pitt, and then, you know, like I mentioned, Byron Murphy also coming out of Texas. I think those are the kind of archetypes just in my head right away that I kind of group him in with. But yeah, pass rush potential's through the roof. It's just the cards are stacked against him to ever be a very stout run defender at the next level. You know, if you told me that in 3-4 years after, you know, working his ass off in the weight room, after, you know, taking the nutrition program serious, if you told me he turned into a serviceable run defender year 3 or year 4, totally would believe it. Just because We talk about quickness and first step as almost a solely pass rush trait, but it really isn't. It's going to help him against the run, beating these linemen to their marks, filling these gaps. Just that, certainly going to have to get stronger. I think he'll be serviceable down the line, but, year one, year two, it's just a kid that just can't see the field in that capacity. You might see him in some packages on third down where they kind of want to turn up the juice and turn up the heat, and they're going to put him on the field then. But until he gets stronger, until he gets bigger, it's not going to be a kid that you're going to see in an expanded role on the Georgia defense, I don't think, or wherever he ends up committing. But yeah, one of the most juiced up defensive tackle prospects in the 2026 cycle. That was Anthony Lonon Jr. You guys let me know what you think about him. Any other 2026 kids you want me to watch? I'm also starting to watch some 2027 prospects. Feel free to reach out. Thanks for watching.